Hey, this is Tom Webster, and this is Sounds Profitable for Wednesday, June 5th, 2024. My audience won't tolerate advertising. Have you ever heard a podcaster say that? I sure have. Here are 3 things I know to be true about that statement: my audience won't tolerate advertising. Number 1, I'm sure there are people in your audience for whom that is true, and they're the ones who email you and ping you on social media. Number 2, I'm sure there are people for whom this is not true. They do not email you to tell you that they love ads. They just don't email you. And number 3, if someone stops listening to your show because you ran an ad, you never really had them in the first place. Your love will forever remain unrequited. Like the poet Gordon Sumner once wrote, if you love someone, set them free. Free, free, set them free. Still, it's a commonly repeated sentiment, and I've been looking for a place to test whether or not this is really a concern. Fortunately, the right opportunity presented itself in our next study from Sounds Profitable, Ad Nauseam, which will premiere in a free webinar next Wednesday, June 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern, and you can register at the link in the show notes. We've done a lot of research here at Sounds Profitable that shows the effectiveness of podcast advertising and how it's one of the absolute safest and best places for brands to spend money in. But you can have too much of a good thing, even with ads. Even the most tolerant of audiences can hear too many of the same ad, and that can lead them to tuning out of your podcast. With Ad Nauseam, we wanted to see what consumer expectations are for the amount of ads in a podcast, the variety of those ads, and even where they expect to hear them. So we'll cover ad frequency, we'll cover perceptions of hearing the same ad multiple times in a single episode, ad skipping habits, what makes an ad memorable, and if they could design a podcast, ad breaks and all, where would the listeners place commercial messages? And more stats and jokes as usual. But back to our original question. Will your audience tolerate advertising? Well, we asked a sample of over 1,000 weekly podcast listeners to tell us the truth about this. And remember, people are often performative in surveys like this. They'll usually overstate how much they skip ads, for example, or how much they don't like them, because it's how they want to respond. And yet, even with that caveat, here's what we found in Ad Nauseam. When we asked people, when listening to a podcast, how do you feel about the ads? We gave them 5 choices: intolerable, disruptive and barely tolerable, slightly annoying but tolerable, don't mind them, and generally enjoy them. Now, the percentage said that they enjoy them or don't mind them was 48. The percentage of weekly podcast listeners who said that ads were intolerable was 1, as in a single percent. An additional 8% noted they were barely tolerable, with the remainder finding them increasingly tolerable and even enjoyable. In fact, 17 times more podcast consumers say they generally enjoy them than found them intolerable. We've uncovered some of the reasons for this in previous studies, like the medium moves the message and the ad bargain. The podcast audience generally hears far fewer advertisements than other media consumers because their media of choice is light on ads. They're listening to less broadcast ad-supported media than other Americans. And they're also the most likely media consumer segment to subscribe to multiple ad-free premium music and video services. They aren't being clobbered with ads, so the ones they do get have a much lower barrier to attention and are directly linked to creator support. What this new data shows us is a check on those previous findings. Podcast listeners do indeed tolerate ads and even listen to them. And we know this, especially in performance marketing or direct response advertising, because the ads are working. So the next time you think to yourself that your audience would never tolerate advertising, think of this data and challenge that assertion. The percentage who generally won't tolerate ads are loud, but that doesn't make them right. And if you still believe your audience is the exception to this, and maybe that's true, however, statistically unlikely, ask yourself this: why is that? Of course, as with anything, you can have too many ads. So how many is too many? Sign up for Ad Nauseam next week and join us to find out. I'm Tom Webster. This has been Sounds Profitable for Wednesday, June 5th, 2024. We'll see you next week.